Very good. Before I forget, how do we say this? Chuk mun nam moi. Chuk mun nam moi. Happy New Year. And if I may say it in Cantonese, Gong Hi Fa Choi. And that's how we would say it in Hong Kong, since we've been to Hong Kong. In Mandarin, it's Gong Xi Fa Cai, which is said in China and in Taiwan. The national language is Mandarin, so that's Gong Xi Fa Cai. But I do wish you all well. And before I get into this discussion about our next stop, Ho Chi Minh City or Saigon, as I am wont to do, I like to kind of talk about what has been percolating, what we've all been talking about since our visit to Hue, in which during the tour, when I got back, over breakfast this morning and so on, people asked a lot of questions, raised a lot of issues. And the first thing I think that came up was the question of the Vietnamese economy. And I got questions like, listen, like, you know, what's really going on? Or are they doing that well? Or in one person's case, he asked, well, I heard that the economy here is in a shambles. Use that word. And I don't know exactly how that particular gentleman picked up on that, or why he thought things were that bad. Because personally, I thought that Hanoi looked quite vibrant, much more. Every time you visit there, there's that much more going on. And especially being there over Chinese New Year, I was quite impressed with the level of activity and how nice the city looked. But to give you some idea of exactly how the economy is doing, most economists will say that over the last 10 years, from 2000 or so to the present, a little over 10 years, the economy has been one of the best performing economies in Asia, growing at almost at a 10% clip. Not bad, not bad. Of course, they've had a very low base to work from, but the economy has been growing. Inflation has been a problem. Now, it's very interesting. You ask the guy on the street, you know, you ask your tour guide, you ask, you know, the people in the hotels or whatever, and they'll say it's much worse, like more like 20%. But if you look at the better reports from investment banks and so on, they talk about it being about what the growth rate is, around 7% or so. Not low, but not terribly high either. But again, the people on the street complain all the time about the rising prices, particularly commodity prices and food prices. So that's been what I've been telling people who ask me any questions about the Vietnamese economy. And while I think it is better in the south, where we're heading, it is doing pretty well in the north as well. And from what I saw, I hope you all agree, Hue and Da Nang look pretty good too. A lot of activity. And again, I haven't read or done much research on what's going on. I haven't read the latest statistics about these two cities, but it looks to me that things are looking up as well in these central located cities. I was asked a good question about life expectancy here in Vietnam. It looked to, I guess, Pat, right? Pat says, you know, it doesn't look like there are too many old people around. In fact, the life expectancy for males here is 73 years old. And for females, like in most countries, it's higher, 76 years old for females. I don't know about you all, but I'm quite surprised about how the dollar, or the dollarization of the Vietnamese economy, never seems to go away. When I first came here in 1994, I wasn't too surprised. The extent to which you could use dollars to buy just about anything. A T-shirt, a tube of toothpaste, paying for your hotel bill. But and I know that the extent to which, and I've always tried not to do that, by the way, personally. I try to use, exchange my money into Vietnamese dong and make my payments and so on. But, as we all have done these last few days, dollars are very much anticipated even. They want the dollar. Again, the government has tried its best to wean its people away from using the dollars, but they cannot. Why? Anybody know why? Sorry? Inflation, right. They're worried about inflation most of all. And frankly, they have very little confidence in the dong because they're always worried about inflation and the value of the dong going down. They have much more confidence in the US dollar. So that's why no matter what the government has tried to do, the Vietnamese dong is, the dollar is preferred over the Vietnamese dong. And of course, the Vietnamese love gold. They did before the opening up of the economy, and they still love gold. And they'll hoard it, they'll bury it in their backyard, they'll do whatever, but they love gold. Another thing that came up, I don't know how many went to the Thiên Mu Pagoda the other day, or yesterday. You saw the Aston Martin car? You saw that? Well, I don't know if you, but I certainly was surprised with some research I was doing in preparation for this trip. That I had been to the pagoda, but I hadn't seen the car. I don't know, for whatever reason, I would rush through with whatever, but I hadn't, and I had read about it. Now, I suppose, well, for those of you who didn't go, you may recall years ago when the Vietnamese War, the Vietnam War was getting started, actually it was in 1963, when we all read about or saw on TV when the monk, set himself on fire on the street in Saigon. Well, the story goes in some of the travel books that we all take along on trips like this, is that this monk drove this Aston Martin car from Hue to Saigon. Not true. Not true. First of all, if you ever saw this car, no way you could make it all the way from Hue, from the pagoda in Hue at Thiên Mu, down to Ho Chi Minh City. The story is, the truth of the matter is, what he did was, he drove that car from a pagoda in Saigon to a pagoda, to another pagoda, and that's where and just outside that other pagoda, he set himself aflame. And of course, that made headlines around the world. And he did own that car. The car was given to him, we think, by British admirers or British Buddhists. And that car is now kept on the grounds of where that Thiên Mu Pagoda is. So I was glad I went there, and it cleared up for me what the real story was. So when you ever read about this car in the Thiên Mu Pagoda, you might want to keep in mind he did not drive it all the way from Hue, not according to what these tour books are saying. I got another very good question. Wealth distribution, or the income gap. In other words, people may look like they're doing pretty well in Hanoi, and I assume that they're doing pretty well in Ho Chi Minh City, but how well are they doing in the countryside? Well, the gap is very wide, very wide. They probably make 10 to 15 times more money in the city than they do in the countryside, and the gap is widening. But this is a problem not only that Vietnam is faced with. We're going to go to Bangkok shortly. A big problem in Bangkok. The income levels are very high, are much, much higher in Bangkok as compared to all over that country, north, south, east, or west. And it's something that they have to be concerned about. They're trying to deal with it. Same is true in China, as probably you know. Eastern seaboard versus all these interior provinces. So it's a problem all across the country and here as well. They are aware of it, and they're trying their best to deal with it. Okay. Those were the key questions that were raised to me in the last couple of days, so I thought I'd bring it to your attention. Okay. Now, Ho Chi Minh City, the commercial center with pizzazz, not pizza, right? This is not a typo, as Eric pointed out this morning, but they do have pizza in Ho Chi Minh City or Saigon. I'd like to, before, again, we get into the heart of this discussion, to kind of review with you all what we talked about this past week. We mentioned that if you look at the map, in that Tonkin area, the north area, that's where the Viets, or the cradle of the civilization started, right? The North Vietnamese, or the Vietnamese civilization as we know it, the Vietnamese people as we know it, emanated from the northern part of the country, the Red River Valley, right? Then we talked about Da Nang, and we talked about Hue, right? Those central cities, you see there, those were very much influenced by the Indian culture. The north very much influenced by China, being on the border of China. Inland, the further down we go, we see the influence of the Chams, which was an Indianized civilization. And then as we go further down now to Ho Chi Minh City, we see the influence of the Khmers. These are the Cambodian-type people that are responsible for Angkor Wat. They prevailed in the southern part of the country. And now if you look at the map, you see where Cambodia is. It shouldn't be surprising that Cambodia, or the Khmers of Cambodia, this ethnically and linguistically different people than the Viets, the Vietnamese, they wanted to control Saigon or Ho Chi Minh City because of its presence on the South China Sea. So if you want to do any kind of trade, it would help if you had a trading post there on the sea, so you can make your way a lot easier to China and points up north. Okay, so the Khmers, the Cambodians, if you will, always wanted to control that southern portion of Vietnam, particularly down in the south in what we now call Saigon. Okay, so again, Viets north, Indianized civilizations in the middle part of the country, and especially the Khmers down in the south. All right. Now, a word again about this title, Ho Chi Minh City, Commercial Center with Pizzazz. I may have to change this because I've often described the city with all this vitality. I used to describe it as beehive of activity. I remember writing a report when I first went there about that, because the temptation is, for most of us, you go to Hanoi first, especially when, in my case, I was the first representative of my bank to go to Vietnam, so I had to go do diligence, right, and be a good old boy and go to Hanoi first, pay my respects, if you will, to the head offices of the major banks and to the central bank, and say, I'm in your country, I'm delighted to be here, and I'm going to be seeing your big banks, and I'm going to be going down south. And they were delighted to see me at the time. But again, you get a feel for what was going on in Hanoi. And the feeling was, wow, geez, they have a lot of these cyclos, you know, on the streets, not too many cars, fair number of motorcycles, but it was pretty quiet, actually, in 1994, 1995. And then you would come down south, and you say, well, motorcycles all over the place, many more cars. And to me, Ho Chi Minh City had a lot of flair. A lot going on. People were more colorfully dressed. They were a lot less conservative than the people up north. It was obvious to me in discussions they were very entrepreneurial. They were more comfortable with foreigners. They were sharp or sharper. See, that was always the temptation, to compare and contrast the people and what we saw in the South compared to what we saw in the North. So hence, I would often describe Ho Chi Minh City as this commercial city or center with pizzazz, as if Hanoi didn't have pizzazz or flair. But the more I travel now to Hanoi, the more I sense that the gap is narrowing. Hanoi also has a certain amount of flair. By the way, we always thought of Hanoi also as having some charm that Ho Chi Minh didn't have or Saigon didn't have. But again, my impressions are changing. My impressions are changing because I feel that Hanoi is becoming much more open, much more easy to deal with, comfortable with foreigners and such. So again, I may have to change this title somewhat. Now, a few other things. Saigon, and by the way, you can call it Saigon, Ho Chi Minh, it doesn't matter. It's the largest city in Vietnam. Originally swampland, inhabited by the Khmer people. And again, one thing that is apparent as we go move down south and go eventually to Bangkok and then to Singapore, all of these, in the 19th century, all of these places were very small fishing villages, had very tiny settlements, and it's amazing what has happened in such a short span of time. But again, the Saigon was a swampland. Eventually, as we touched upon in previous discussions, it was the capital of Cochin, China, starting in 1887. And it was later this independent Republic of Vietnam from 1955 to 1975. It was propped up, and again, this is something I mentioned before, as an anti-communist capitalist republic, and very friendly toward Catholics, and maybe not so friendly toward Buddhists at one point. Hence the problems with the Buddhists of Hue, hence this Buddhist monk who set himself aflame on the streets of Saigon. Saigon fell when it was captured by the communists on April 30th, 1975. Right? Today has 10 million people, pretty good-sized population, and has the largest ethnic Chinese population in all of Vietnam, in Cho Lom, which some of us will visit when we go there tomorrow. One thing I also would like you to keep in mind, think about it a second. We now know, okay, 10 million people in Saigon. There's another, what do we say, 6.5 million in Hanoi. There's 900,000 or so in Da Nang, 400,000 people in Hue. You add it all up, what, a little less than 20 million? It's still a small fraction of the total population of 90-some-odd million. So we're only getting a little slice of what life is like in Vietnam. It's still an agricultural country. There's so many people that live in the interior, away from these capital cities. So I think we all got to kind of keep that in mind, All right. Now, like I said, the Khmer influence in the South prevailed for many, many years. The name of what we now call Saigon or Ho Chi Minh City was Pre Nokor. That was a Cambodian Khmer name. It means forest, kingdom, or city. And nothing could be further from our imaginations when we go look at Saigon today. It's not a forest kingdom anymore. This Mekong Delta, which it sits in, and I guess that's on some of our itineraries for tomorrow or the next day, it's swampland, but very good for the yields of rice. In fact, that in the Mekong Delta, as opposed to the Red River Delta, they get 3 crops of rice a year, not 2. They export rice, while Hanoi doesn't export rice. That's another reason why the southern part of the country does better than the northern part of the country economically. Again, so people in the south, needless to say, benefit by that. Highly influenced by Indian ideas, this region for many, many years. Again, until the Viets pushed their way north to south. Right? It was a Cambodian city up as early as 1620. Again, the Saigon that we know it, or Pre Nokor. And by the way, there's a lot of folklore. I don't know if you picked up on that. And the folklore surrounding Saigon was that there was a dowry that was given by a Khmer prince to the family of a Vietnamese princess. And this, and basically what he did was give southern Vietnam, just like that, to the Vietnamese, which enabled the Vietnamese or Vietnam to become a little more stable than it had been, because there were a lot of clashes between the Vietnamese pushing south and the Khmers that were there at the time. So anyway, the Khmers like to think that they gave Saigon to the Vietnamese people. So this region, this Mekong Delta, was very important to the Khmers and very important to the Vietnamese as they pushed their way south. I just liked about, in fact, there was we call it the Funan dynasty, which existed in the south, as you could see there from the 1st to the 7th centuries. And for those of you like history and archaeology, this Osseo port, which is still around today, there you go, some relics have been found there to give us some idea of how Indianized this Khmer civilization was or is, and you see there those various relics from that period of time. Again, this was mostly swampland, but also canals were built. In fact, this Osseo that's translated as a glass canal. Eventually, the Funan dynasty was eclipsed, or this region was eclipsed by what was happening in Java and Sumatra, and the fact that foreigners, Westerners that came to this part of the world, were more interested in what was going on in Java and Sumatra because of the spices, nutmeg, pepper, cloves that were found in that part of the region and not found in Vietnam. Again, if you're interested in this part of Vietnamese history, when you're in Ho Chi Minh City, you might want to visit the Museum of Vietnamese History, which is very good in Ho Chi Minh. They have a lot of pottery, jewels, tools, which date back to this Funan dynasty. Very interesting historical, a very good museum. Also from this period, we find evidence of Greco-Roman jewelry, Persian coinage, Indian seals and rings, Chinese mirrors. So this was a part of the country which had an awful lot of interaction with other countries in Southeast Asia, with Indian pilgrims, scholars that were coming through. And again, this is influence that was received by this Khmer ethnic population in the middle part of the country. Now, as I said, the history and development of the country is all about the Viets pushing their way south, right? This Chinese dominated, this Chinese influenced, even controlled civilization pushing south. And they were as successful in eventually eclipsing this Cambodian Khmer civilization because during this 17th century, the Khmers found themselves at war with Thailand. So they couldn't devote enough energy and resources in keeping this Saigon area, this Mekong Delta area, under their control. So eventually they went back east, if you will, and the Vietnamese kept pushing south. And by the 1860s, Pre-Nakor started to be known as Saigon. Now, this word, Saigon, it comes from the Chinese. And we think, again, remember what I told you a few days ago, sometimes it's hard to figure out where exactly. They say from the Chinese, and I'm a Mandarin speaker, and sometimes it doesn't sound anything like I ever heard. And because it may have been a dialect that they took the name from. In any case, it came from certain trees that are found in Saigon. Still found, it's called kapok, which, again, I don't know much about, but K-A-P-O-K, the kapok tree, which were found in the Saigon area. So it took this name of Saigon. Now, we talked about the war, the civil war that took place, unified under the Wens. And eventually the Wens moved the capital, you recall, from Hanoi to Hue, from the north to the central part. Now, I mention this again because after this took place, after Hue was established as the seat of power for the emperors, Hanoi and Saigon began to flourish. There was some stability in the country, allowing the populations of these two cities to grow, and again, this helped the country overall. And Saigon became a commercial center. And when you go there, you'll realize why. It's also, you see, it's on the banks of the Saigon River, and a good place, again, for a lot of commerce to take place. Now, it's interesting. I should have said, remember I said Viets in the north, the Indian-influenced Chams, and then the Khmers, also influenced by the Indian civilization in the south. I should have said, and on top of that, sprinkled all over that were the French, right? And that's pretty much Vietnamese history. Trade in Christianity. Again, I should have written Christianity and trade. Because it's really the French attempt to civilize the inferior races, which saw the French influence grow as it did for many, many years in Vietnam, and eventually led to the first, you remember, the taking over of Da Nang in 1858, and then Saigon in 1859. And they often use the excuse of their missionaries being abused, mistreated, killed for their making all attempts to establish a post, a trading post, a mission, and then sending in the troops. They eventually set up this French colony or federation. They called the north Tonkin. They called the central part Annam, southern peace. And then Cochin, China, where Saigon is, was the south. And that was in 1884. Saigon became the capital of this French Indochina, again, because it kept growing and growing in importance. Now, I'd like to remind you, because some of us, we visited the tomb of Tu Tuk. I don't know if you went on that tour yesterday. And this was, now Tu Tuk, the emperor, he ruled, if you will, with the French in the background from his seat of power in Hue at about this time, when the French Indochina was being established. And it was remarkable to me that here we were in the 19th century, and you walk into this tomb. First of all, you know that so much of the imperial city was based on, it was like a replica of the Forbidden City in Beijing, right? We established that. And of course, then I also told you that the tombs were modeled after the tombs of China. I had forgotten, or didn't notice, the extent to which that Chinese is written on the not the tomb, because we don't even really know where Tutuk died. I mean, it's kind of the area where the tomb is. All this, or the monument, as it were, covered with Chinese inscription. It was very interesting to me yesterday, just before we reached that spot where this big slab of concrete exists near the tomb, that the guide says, well, you can go look at that inscription there. It's in the old script. It's old script. So I thought it was Vietnamese, right? So we walk up there, and in classical Chinese, written Chinese. Now, we're dealing with the 19th century, a few hundred years after, right? When we talked about the Jesuits and the Catholics, they Latinized or Romanized the Vietnamese language for the first time. In the 19th century, they didn't do any of that. It was still in Chinese. And I thought that was very significant, that they, by then, did not adopt the local language. They were still using the court language. And they were still adhering to Confucianism. They were very inward-looking still at that time. And it's interesting also that Ho Chi Minh, one of the first things he did, not unlike Mao Zedong, by the way, but one of the first things he did was realize that if I'm going to be better able to communicate with my people, right, with my people, and if they're going to read my literature, be it propaganda, no matter what it is, I better be able to talk to them or communicate with them in this Romanized script. No more of this, you know, Sanskrit of the emperor or Chinese, you know. And by the way, it was classical Chinese. I mean, this, you know, on the walls of this tomb, right? So he realized very early on that this country of Vietnam better adopt this script that we know today, this alphabetized script, 24 letters in the alphabet, so on and so forth. And I think that was very important. If those of you know much about China, that was one of the first things that Mao did, right? He says, if I'm going to communicate with my people, I better simplify the language. So he came up with a simplified script, you know, the calligraphy, right? The written language, more simplified, so my people can more quickly learn, can be more quickly become literate. Ho Chi Minh picked up on that and did the